So I'm just going to spend this episode asking dickish questions and making you answer them. I think I've decided
We
that's what I'm
have
going to
we
do.
have we have finally revealed the true Dan.
Yeah. This is my wheelhouse. Welcome everyone to another edition of Drunk Agile. One of those Drunk Agiles where we're wearing all the same stuff, drinking all the same things. So, but welcome. If you're interested, you go. Maybe we'll leave it as an exercise for the reader to try and go figure out which night that we actually filmed this thing. So having said that, let's just kind of jump right into it. Prateek, this is a question that we get a lot. I don't, we were, Prateek and I, right before we hit record, we were trying to figure out if we've ever really covered this. I mean, I think we feel like we've maybe peripherally touched on it, but I don't know if we've ever hit it head on. So we're just going to spend this episode taking a more direct approach for this particular question. And Prateek, here's the question. I've got a particular epic that I'm working on. And I'm trying to figure out when that individual epic will be done. Now, it turns out, in the way that we do work, our work breakdown structure is our epics break down into stories. So when I go to do forecasting, I've really got two options based on everything that you and I have talked about. There's really two options for forecasting that epic. I could either throw all my historical epics cycle time into a scatter plot, and calculate percentiles like we've always talked about, and say, okay, based on the cycle time of epics, this is how long it should take this individual epic to get done. Or I could take throughput at the story level and say, based on the number of stories that are left in this epic, I can run a Monte Carlo simulation and use historical throughput of stories, and then do the forecast based on the Monte Carlo simulation. So Prateek, I mean, help me out here. We've got these two options. Are they both valid? Is one better than the other, and why? So what do you think?
So yeah, I mean, for me, technically, they are both valid methods. They're both valid ways of looking at this. The question that when people ask us this question, the question we usually ask back is, how stable is that epic or whatever features flow system? Like, are you limiting WIP at that epic level? Are you right sizing your epics? Are you doing those things? If you are actively managing it, it might not be that bad to use that cycle time scatterplot to figure out how long this epic will take. Now, the number of stories in Monte Carlo method, which again, leave it up to the reader to find out which episode we discuss that in, where you do a Monte Carlo for the number of stories in this epic and figure out when that will be done. That is valid as long as you're maintaining the flow, as long as you're managing flow at the story level. If you're doing that, you should be able to use that pretty reliably to figure out how long it'll take you to do X number of stories, and then that translates up to that epic. Turns out you still need to limit the WIP at the epic level for that to work. That's another episode. But the story method works as long as you are good at maintaining that discipline at the story level.
But so help me understand a little bit better. Are you saying then that the story, so using Monte Carlo simulation at the story level, are you saying that that is better? That's like what our default approach should be? Is that what you are clearly saying?
That is what I'm saying. I'm saying,
okay, why?
So one of the things that I mentioned earlier was, are you able to right size your epics? That's one of the questions we want to ask. The way we usually ask that question of right sizing, for those of you who've been listening to us, is we put up a scatter plot and we go, hey, looks like we get things done in 10 days or less. This new thing, can we get it done in 10 days or less? If the answer is yes, great, let's go for it. If the answer is no, well, let's break this up. Turns out epics initiatives, these higher level things usually have a cycle time in the order of months. It's 2 months, 3 months, something like that. And that's when we ask the question of, hey, can we get this thing done in 2 months or less? Let's right size this thing. And almost immediately, any developer would say, 3 months? I can do anything in 3 months. And you'll have a really hard time right sizing that epic. Now, on the other hand, if you go, we usually get our epics done in 15 stories or less. This thing, when you look at it, does it look like 15 stories or less, or does it look like 50 stories? That's a much easier question to answer in order to right size things. And once we've answered that question, and once we can say that most of our epics are 15 stories or less, well, now we have a much better chance at running something like Monte Carlo at the story level and translating that into a prediction.
So I'm just going to spend this episode asking dickish questions and making you answer them. I think I've decided that's what I'm going to do.
We have finally revealed the true Dan.
Yeah. This is my wheelhouse. This is a part I was born to play. Okay, but I thought, if I remember correctly, all of you did a Drunk Agile way back when you talked about the difficulty of forecasting epics at the story level when you've got multiple dependencies. In my organization, I've got dozens of dependencies. And you just told me that I can't use Monte Carlo simulation when I have at the story level when I have those dependencies.
Right.
Okay, so how is Monte Carlo at the story level better then? So how would you explain that?
Well, this is where there's a reason why we said that was the default approach, not the only approach. This is where now, to be completely fair, you absolutely can design a Monte Carlo simulation, which will take all the hundreds of dependencies that the organization has into account and give you a decent answer. The problem is gathering all the data and setting up all these dependencies in order to run that Monte Carlo simulation. That's usually the harder part. It is absolutely possible, but it's pretty hard to get your hand around all that data because you need data from every team that you're trying to forecast and every team that you have a dependency on. So this is where
and you need the relevant data for when all of those dependencies existed, right?
Yeah, how often they happen, when they existed, which feature was dependent on which one. You need all that in order to do that Monte Carlo simulation. That is where now the difficulty of doing this Monte Carlo simulation becomes greater than the problems we might have had with the Scatterplot. That is absolutely when we would say, all right, our default method is now becoming more increasingly riskier. Increasingly riskier, yes. I don't know if it's increasingally more risky or increasingly riskier.
We'll go to VAR later on that one, but
later on, yeah. Now that we're including more and more risk, more and more assumptions into our Monte Carlo simulation, at this point, our scatter plot is probably going to bail us out and give us a much better answer. Because these dependencies, if they've existed in the past, they have affected the cycle time of our features. This is no longer, our feature cycle times at this point are being determined no longer by right sizing, but more by the dependencies that exist in our system. So now we have to go to the scatter plot and get that answer.
And I think again, we'll have to check the tape on this. But I think we talked about this before. That what you just said there is even problematic by going to the scatter plot, because if our cycle time for a typical epic is in that 2 to 3 month range, how long is it going to take us to get enough data so that we even have a valid scatter plot? Is that going to take us 6 months? Is that going to take us 10 months? Is that, how long? And if we have to go back 10 months to get enough data, is that data that we were using 10 months ago still relevant?
Yeah, and it's probably worse, because if it's this dependency laden system, it's probably not 2 to 3 months. It's probably 6 to 10 months, which means you have to go even further back.
Or 4 years, as we talked about in
previous, 4 years.
in a previous episode. Yeah.
Yeah. So it starts making things worse. Now, the answer you'll get from the scatter plot will be pretty unsatisfactory, because you'll get an answer like 85% of our or 90% of our features get done in 12 months or less. And at that point, someone from your customer side is bound to ask, wait, are you telling me that one feature, that one little thing I'm asking you, is going to take you an entire year? And hopefully that starts the conversation of how do we get rid of some of these dependencies.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you started to go where my potentially my final rude question. Um, so we've just talked about problems with doing Monte Carlo at the story level. We've talked about problems with doing forecasting with epic cycle time. So, I mean, so how do I know? I mean, how do I know? Because all the things that you talked about that are problems are things that exist in my organization. So what do I do? I mean, what can I not forecast, or what's the answer for me?
I mean, you you can forecast, you just cannot trust your forecast. And what's probably worse is your customers will not trust you when you give them that forecast. Um, this again, this will be fun to try to remember the episode number, but again, our avid listeners will probably remember this. We did an episode on the voice of the customer versus the voice of the process. What your process is telling you is that your ability to your performance, your process performance, and your ability to deliver features is way out of line with what your customers want. Now it's up to us to figure out how do we bring these two voices closer to each other. How do we can we set expectations from our customers around, hey, you just have to wait a year instead of waiting a month, which usually doesn't work. Or what do we need to do with our process to make that better, to get rid of some of these dependencies, and then make the simpler methods work for us, to make our default methods work for us to give some predictions.
Yeah, that's where I was really kind of hoping you would go. It's
Yeah.
things like you need to eliminate dependencies, not manage dependencies. It's things like you need to understand flow at all of these levels, at the story level, at the epic level, at the feature level, at the initiative level, you need to understand flow at all of those levels. Again, see a previous episode for that. Um, you need to, because you understand flow at all those levels, need to do things like limit work in progress, at all of those levels. So if you're an organization where you suffer from too much WIP and you suffer from too many dependencies, uh, it's funny how many times we get that statement of people coming to us, well, but we've got too much WIP, we got too many dependencies. You've kind of answered your own question there. I don't know what else you want me to tell you. It's like you need, but we can't get rid of those dependencies, and we can't get rid of the. I personally would argue you can. I mean, it just takes the will to do it. So, for me, that's kind of the short answer. If you feel like a lot of this stuff is hitting too close to home, there are actions you have to take. If you don't take these actions, then use whatever forecasting estimation technique you want. We say this all the time. Use whatever forecasting estimation technique you want. They will all be equally bad. And your customers will be pissed off at you, and you won't be predictable, and whatever. But if you really, really do care about things like predictability and effectiveness and efficiency, then it is going to bring all of these flow principles to bear. Did I just take the last word, or do you have anything to add to
Yeah, I
that?
think you did. That's all good.
So again, let us know. Are these problems that you face? I mean, what would you do for you? Is it better for you to use epic cycle time? Is it better for you to break the epics down into stories and use story throughput in a Monte Carlo simulation? What's better for you? Which do you think is the preferred approach, if there is a preferred approach? We'd love to leave us a comment, let us know, ask us a question if there's anything more that we didn't explain very well, because we are kind of far into our whiskeys
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
If there's something that we didn't explain very well, ask us a question, and we will address it. We'd love to hear from our viewers. So having said all that, for Prateek Singh, my name is Daniel Vacanti. I want to say thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye, everyone.